Okie dokie, welcome in. This is Christy Hendricks with Change of Shift. And I'm really glad to have you guys in with me for another great interview. I've got a really amazing guest. She's got so much going on. I don't even know how this woman does it. But we're about to hear it. So she's going to tell us everything. So first, let me just get up her website. And you're all going to recognize her as soon as you see that. And yes, of course, you're seeing it's Elizabeth Scala. And so Elizabeth is a Johns Hopkins-trained registered nurse. She's a best-selling author and keynote speaker and a consultant on burnout prevention for nurses in all specialties. She admits to once being a total mess. She's a former psychiatric nurse on one of the most acute inpatient units in the state of Maryland. And she lived and worked an overly busy lifestyle, very stressful, very overwhelming life. And of course, all of that took a toll on her relationships and on her physical, mental, and emotional well-being. She is the founder of The Art of Nursing, a Nurses Week program, providing education and inspiration at dozens of hospitals and healthcare organizations across the country. And Elizabeth's online community of over 15,000 nurses has allowed her to teach the lessons in this program in the real world of professional nurses and the rapidly changing healthcare environment. Elizabeth's articles are frequently posted on nursetogether.com, Working Nurse, and healthycareers.com. She's consulted with and been a featured speaker for the South Dakota Nurses Association, Carolinas Healthcare, Wellstar Health System, the National Nurses Health Institute, and many more. Elizabeth holds a master's degrees in both business and nursing. You can find Elizabeth online, and we're looking at her website right now. She's over at elizabethscala.com, and let me go ahead and bring Elizabeth in right now. All right, welcome in, Elizabeth. Nice to have you with us.
Thank you, Christy. Hi, everyone.
Okay, so Elizabeth, that was like quite a bio, quite a lot going on, and you look too young to have experienced all of that and to have accomplished all of that. There's no way.
I hear that actually a lot when I show up to an organization and they pick me up at the airport and the person driving is typically someone involved with the event, and they say that, so I actually weave that into my talk. So I've been a nurse for 13 years though, but yeah, I mean, I'm fairly young, I guess.
Okay, so let's just kind of dive right in. Tell us about a little bit about your history of your career before you started your website, your entrepreneurial ventures. What were you doing?
Sure. So a lot of that's in the bio. I won't go into too much detail, but working as a psych nurse, and it was like a Jekyll and Hyde story, because at work, I was excelling up the clinical ladder, involved in departmental committees, precepting people, charge nurse every day on day shift. And coming into work, people were saying, wow, she's doing great. And of course, I put on that smile and had that brave face and kept working hard. My husband probably was the one that received the brunt of the other side of the story, because I'd come home fighting, sobbing, or happy. You know, he never knew what was going to happen. Up in the middle of the night, throwing temper tantrums, unable to sleep, calling the unit, like, did I tell you this? Did I tell you that? You know, thinking about work all the time, and eventually hit a brick wall. I was up in the middle of the night and said to myself, I cannot go on living like this. And the real tragedy was when I would go into work and didn't even really want to talk to the patients anymore. So that was dangerous. And he was very supportive and said, you need to take a break, figure this out. So when I was graduating with my master's, it all kind of happened at the same time. I was fortunate enough to work with a wellness center on their social media and marketing platform. And they had that interaction with me as a student, but also knew I was graduating with my master's and actually recruited me to come work with them part-time. It was only 24 hours a week. So I took a risk. I mean, I took a leap of faith and said, you know what? I don't know how we're going to pay all the bills. I had a nice job, a good paying salary. I'm going to work 24 hours a week with no benefits, no vacation, no nothing. And it worked out. My husband totally stepped up to the plate. We figured it out. And since then, you know, never looked back.
Wow. Okay, that is quite a leap of faith. Yeah. Because, nurses, as nurses, we're used to having some, pretty good benefits and pay and stability. And yeah, it does take a leap of faith. I think it takes a certain kind of person to, I don't know, to have that, to take that risk, but also to have that trust in themselves to say, you know what, I can get something going. I can do it. I can do it. So now tell us a little bit then, tell us about your endeavors now, your entrepreneurial endeavors.
Sure. So I've been working on this business, growing this business for probably about 6 years time now. And it's evolved over time. When I worked at the Wellness Center, I actually was there for a year. The program was running smoothly. I was the coordinator of a program where physicians referred patients, and I was overseeing all of that. And my boss came to me one day and said, let's go to lunch. And we were talking. He's like, everything's going well here, but I want you to feel fulfilled. Is there more you'd like to do? What can we do to help you continue to grow? He introduced me to coaching, which I, at the time, that was 2010 or 2011, knew nothing about coaching. So went through a coaching certification. So the beginning of my business, I thought, oh, I'm going to coach nurses. I'm going to coach them to be healthy. I'm going to coach them to eat well and all this kind of stuff. Well, it failed miserably for multiple reasons. One was we already know that information. You don't need someone telling you about it. And secondly, we don't have time a lot of the times to receive the coaching. So, and I didn't know a lot about marketing and pain points and that kind of stuff. So as I say, my business evolved through many iterations. First, I was going to work with one-on-one clients. Then I was running some group programs. And then eventually, through working with my own business coach, came to the realization that I really prefer speaking, being in front of an audience, educating at an organization, working more with clients that are that level of like business to business than business to person. And so that's where I'm at these days.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I can see that. I think that happens probably a lot, where you think that where your audience is or what your audience, is all about. Mm-hmm. And you get into something and you mentioned pain points. I think that for any new nurse entrepreneur, she needs to be very flexible, very adaptable, and be able to recognize when something's not working, and to move on and kind of change. And it doesn't mean having to leave entirely what you were doing, but to be able to just adapt and say, maybe I need to go over here in this direction or do it in this way. So, but that happens not a lot. So, so don't be discouraged. For any of our viewers, don't be discouraged if that happens. It's just a thing, and that's what happens. Okay, so I want to hear about your podcast. Tell us about that and your speaking engagements. But let's start first at your podcast.
Sure. So this too has gone through multiple iterations. It started out as a radio show on a platform called Blog Talk Radio, where literally they host the shows for you. You call in with the telephone, it's all set up through that kind of external dashboard. And that was about being healthy and balanced and all the types of things I started with. I moved that radio show went on for about a year or two, and then I ended it just of my own sheer, I can't keep talking about the same thing and kind of boredom, which is okay. Again, as you mentioned, being flexible as a nurse entrepreneur, if we're not enjoying something, goodness, that's a reason to pivot. So I was kind of bored with that show. I put it to bed. And then I was focused for a medium part of my business. I didn't even mention this at all, and it's not really relevant on my website, but I also do practice Reiki, and I'm a Reiki master teacher. So for a while, I did like a 13 short series radio show on Reiki, where I was interviewing all these nurses and how can you use it in healthcare. And that I knew there was going to be a beginning, a middle, and an end. So that's a way to do a podcast, is to set it up like a series. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you're only going to do this many episodes. So I did that. And then most recently, the podcast, Your Next Shift, is about nursing careers for nursing students and nurses. And it's fun because I have all this fancy equipment. I don't know if equipment and all this kind of stuff that I get to use. And I love interviewing people. I love highlighting and showcasing their very best and kind of be that connector and saying, oh, you need a nurse who does this? I've interviewed someone like that. So For me, it's really fun. For the audience, I have gotten a lot of feedback that it's informational and it helps them think about other things they might be able to do. The podcast is definitely one form of content marketing. So as a nurse entrepreneur, you want to put yourself out there in various avenues and various channels. And so if you like to talk and you like to do audio and maybe you're a little afraid of video like this, podcast could be less intimidating because maybe you don't have to be on screen. So it's just a way of content marketing. And I have gotten speaking engagements and actually organizational clients for the Art of Nursing through the podcast.
Okay, I want to back up just a little tiny bit because for some of our nurses, they're brand new to business. And so when you say content marketing, can you explain that to them?
Sure. So okay. One thing I want to say about, and I'll answer your question, but I want to speak to the podcast specific. Someone says, you know, you have to hire an editor and you need that equipment. Like, you're not making any money from the podcast. So that being said, it's similar to if you're doing a blog or you're doing a video or you're doing a podcast. You're putting content out there for people to find you, first of all, so you're visible and you're updating your website with new content. Secondly, they get to kind of, you know, listen to you, see you, get to like you, trust you. That's that relationship building. And so instead of just stuffing content like buy my product, buy my program, you're giving value through information, through education, through inspiration, through your specific expertise. And then so that content is a marketing channel. It's not directly like I'm marketing, here's my product, buy it. It's get to like, know, and trust me, get to know what I'm about, and let me help you with, here's a tool, it's free, and build that relationship. So that's what I would say as content marketing. It could be, again, through written format blogging, through the audio podcast, through video on YouTube, whatever that may be.
Right, exactly. And kind of a word of caution too, you don't have to be in every single, you don't have to be in all of those niches. You know, it can be overwhelming when you think, oh my gosh, what do you mean I have to have a website and a course and you know, this constant blogging and a podcast and it gets so overwhelming that you can end up throwing up your hands and saying, forget it. But you just start somewhere. But I think one of the most important places to start is really with just creating your content. Because if you have no content, you have nothing to share. You have no message. Your content is your message. And you're, you know, over at your podcast, you're expressing that message right there. And like you said, you know, helping or enabling nurses to get to know you and what you're all about. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if a nurse wanted to start like a podcast, how would she go about doing that?
So the first thing you mentioned is exactly spot on, Christy, is get your content together. So whether it be creating sort of an outline, knowing exactly the types of things you want to talk about. Let's say you are an expert in Lyme disease as an example. Well, you would create an outline of all the things you could possibly teach, like what is it, how does it happen, how do you treat it, how do you handle it, how do you cope it. Then you would break that up into many segments. So you could kind of get your content ready first. Then as a podcaster, there are two ways to podcast. You can either talk yourself the whole time on air, or you can bring in guests. So you kind of have to decide the style. Like, do you want to have a conversational style where you're interviewing people and bringing on other experts? You want it just should be you, or you could do a mixture of both. Sometimes I'll throw in some shows where it's just me talking, but for the most part, I interview people. That's sort of like the organization of how to get the content together. The equipment, it seemed a little intimidating, but you don't even really need that. All you need is a laptop and some type of recording device. Now, you could record basically through the computer and do it very basic, or you can get a handheld recorder and a microphone like I have. This stuff I have here costed probably $160 total. So it's like a one-time purchase, and then you use this for life, where you plug the recorder in, you record over Skype. It's recording in your handheld recorder, so you get a little MP file. Mm-hmm. And then for a while, I was editing myself. And as you mentioned, Christy, I have a lot going on. So it was kind of becoming a burden to edit it. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to continue. So I do pay an editor. That's a little advanced. But you can edit it yourself. There's GarageBand, there's Audacity. Those are free. So you can go in and edit and play. What I would do is just have a plan. Maybe, as I said in the very beginning, set up a series and say to yourself, you know what? I'm going to have a 10-week series, and I'm going to record 10 episodes, and I'm going to work on those and launch those. That way you have a finite number and you can like say you accomplished it. And if it's fun and successful and you enjoyed it, you can continue on. One thing I do, and this will be my last thing because I know it's probably overwhelming. One thing I do is I do batch record all in like a day. Like I will have a Friday and have as many interviews as I can. So that way they're prepared out ahead of time and I don't have to constantly like keep up with it. So I think the first thing would be to figure out is, what do you enjoy doing? Do you enjoy speaking in this way? Would you enjoy interviewing people? And would podcasting be something that's of interest to you? And if it is, then take those steps to kind of move further. And I can help, give people links and stuff to like this equipment and all that if someone's really interested.
Yeah. You know what? And I was just going to ask you that too. I at some point, was kind of looking at doing a podcast, and this was several years ago. I didn't actually go forward with it, but I did end up, doing the equipment. Like you said, it doesn't really cost that much, but we'll put up the links for things like GarageBand and Audacity, which Audacity I was using to edit those. And so what a person does, you come up with your content. You talk about, you're thinking about what you want to convey, what message you want to convey. You, of course, need to go through who is your audience. Let's see. And then you're going to start recording. You end up with a MP3 file or I know my video is like MP4.
Yeah. And one thing I didn't mention is actually hosting. So
I was just going to ask you that. So first we're going to record the file. We're going to record the audio, and then we edit it on those programs like GarageBand or Audacity. We'll have the links for that. And so now, yes, let's go into hosting.
Right. So you take that file, whatever you get in, and for me it was Audacity. I would take that file, and there's something called Libsyn, Libsyn, and there's different plans. I mean, it says low as $5 a month, $15 a month. Bells and whistles like $25 a month, but you would take that and you load it there, so it's hosted, so it's not, first of all, so it can get pushed out to iTunes and all the other different podcast players. I am not extremely tech savvy. I just know that I take this, I put it over a Libsyn, and then it's out to the greater general public. Additionally, I mean, I do use my blog to put you could put like a plugin, a Blueberry plugin or some other plugin things in your blog that can have an audio player right there, so people can play it right through your website. But a lot of people now want to be on a mobile device and are not sitting at their laptop. So you want to get it on iTunes or any of those apps, and that's what Libsyn does. It helps you take that file and it makes like a link so that it's on the RSS feed gets kicked out to other places.
Right. And so just so people understand, you can put that audio file on your website. And so why you need the hosting is because it's occupying all the space. This what bandwidth or whatever, right? And if you're putting in that and clogging up your website with all that space of all those files, it like takes up too much of the living room. So you want to put it in somebody else's living room. Am I explaining that okay?
Absolutely. As I said, I'm not.
You're the expert at this.
Well, I was going to say I'm not so techie because before I got into Your Next Shift podcast, I also was one of the co-hosts on RNFM Radio, which is another podcast, and we had a whole team. And again, if you need any of the links for like equipment and stuff, I'm going to point us to that. Okay. But there was like a tech person as a team. I wasn't the tech person. I was more of like the interview person. And then, as I said, now I do have a podcast editor who I love and value greatly. So all of that happens, and I'm not really involved in it. Oh, okay. But you're right about it taking up space and the fact that you need to have external hosting for the actual file because it would be just too large.
Right. Okay, before we even move on, I just want to find out from you, like, when you're first starting out, you're bootstrapping everything, you're trying to do everything, and it's great because you learn a lot of stuff, but there's at some point where you need to hire stuff out. So just briefly, just tell our viewers, where do you find somebody to do this kind of stuff?
Boy, so I've had nightmare experiences and I've had very positive ones. The very best way to find people is through word of mouth referral. So my podcast editor came because another podcaster said, this is my editor and he's fabulous and that kind of thing. So I'm happy to always refer, and I have referred him to other nurses who podcast. I know straight A nursing student also has a podcast, and I said, hey, Nurse Mo, go, check out this guy. And she's like, I'm working with him. So referrals. I mean, you can look at like Upwork. I actually work with someone on Upwork for something else that I work with people. I have used Fiverr for small things like graphics, or if I'm making a PDF, or even maybe a logo for the podcast, let's say. Actually, no, I'll backtrack. Fiverr I do use for a voiceover and a little jingle, because if anyone listens to your next shift, you'll hear there's a man and he talks at the beginning of the show.
I heard your jingle. It's actually nice, yeah.
Yeah, so that's from Fiverr. So that's very inexpensive. And because I found him and worked with him before on other projects, I just keep going back to the same person. Right. So you may have to have some trial and error where, oh yeah, that person was really a dud, and you just kind of say, well, lesson learned. But if you can get a referral from another nurse that you know has a podcast or has a video, whatever people are doing, find out who they really like and love to work with, and go that way for sure.
Right. Okie doke. So let's, all right. So we talked about that. So we talked about your content. We talked about your recording equipment. Let's see. We talked about your editing and your hosting over on Libsyn, and they're the ones that kind of push it out to Stitcher and iTunes and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Okie dokie. What else? Is there anything else? Now, what about promoting? And how do people find your podcast? What would a nurse do was she just going to go tell her friends and it's going to take off and it's going to be great? But, how do you promote your podcast?
Well, I promote it, as I mentioned. I do have it as a weekly show notes. So I have a blog of written content on Mondays, but Wednesdays I always post the show notes. And when I say show notes, there are podcasters that go through a whole large transcription process and all that. I'm not at that place yet. So my show notes are brief because I'm thinking the audience wants to listen, So anyway, but it's coming up weekly on the site. Secondly, of course, social media, having a whole social media plan in terms of putting it on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, wherever I am, to let people know. Since I'm interviewing people and I have a guest, asking them to share it with their audience. So after the podcast, when the podcast releases, I send them an email that has already built in sample posts they can use for social media. I send them the links to the show. I even send them a Word document that has 2 emails they can use exactly written as they would to send to their list. So I do the work for them, but hope that they share. So if they're sharing, that's, more share out. How else to promote it? Well, in the podcast itself, at the end or beginning of each show, I thank the listeners for loyalty and listening and telling them to tell a friend. I tell them, if you enjoyed this episode, to leave a rating or review, because I know iTunes has an algorithm that they keep top secret. Mm-hmm. But those algorithms do make sense. So if you can get people to share a rating or review. And I use Your Next Shift as my hashtag and a lot of things. So it's linked to a book and a Facebook community and the podcast. So my podcast isn't just about, the fact that I love to bake cookies. I strategically placed it in alignment with one of the books I've written, in alignment with my Facebook community, and in alignment with like a topic that I have going. So it's kind of, the visibility is hopefully attached to other things too.
Okay. All right. So it just kind of like builds and builds and builds. It's not something that you create overnight.
No.
It all takes time. And, to be really a nurse entrepreneur, to be any kind of an entrepreneur, it takes time and patience, and you build a little bit at a time. So it doesn't happen overnight. So I just want our viewers to understand it doesn't happen overnight. It didn't happen overnight for Elizabeth. It doesn't happen overnight for anybody, but when you stick with it, it accumulates and it gets the ball rolling, and it kind of gets a little bit easier. Mm-hmm. So, okay, now what about your speaking engagements? What took place first, the podcast or the speaking?
Well, if it would go back way into time, the first radio show, the whole Living Sublime Wellness radio show on Blog Talk Radio, was up and running before I ventured into the speaking world. So I would have to say, in the long scheme of things, the fact that I was doing any kind of interview, podcast, radio was first. This Your Next Shift podcast is actually after my speaking involvement. But I definitely had the first radio show first. So speaking came because, as I said, I've worked with a business coach. I've had the same business coach throughout my whole time. Again, that's another area where I went and tried to find another one, and it was dismal, and I fired a person and was so upset with myself with paying money to people that I didn't get any value from. So I'm sticking with my same business coach now. That being said, in a conversation where I was literally crying and complaining and talking about the fact that I wasn't making any money and this is really hard, around the time that I was still focused on coaching and group programs and trying to do that whole thing, she asked me and said, Elizabeth, okay, you've told me everything you don't want. You know, what is it you want to do? And through conversation and several, months of working with her, we established the fact that I did want to get in front of more people. And one way to do that easily is through speaking. So speaking in the beginning was a form of me getting in front of people. And since I enjoyed it and found it to be profitable, I've shifted it to be a main focal point of my business. But in the beginning, it was another, again, form of content marketing for me. Because you can use speaking to grow your list, which means grow the contacts that you have and the people who, subscribe to your newsletter and stuff. So in the beginning, I was using speaking of more of getting in front of and getting a larger audience.
Okay. All right. So now when you're thinking in your mind, okay, I want to be a speaker, and you obviously have an idea of what you want to talk about, how do you find venues or organizations or groups or what have you to speak to? How do you reach out to them, especially if you're just starting out and you're like feeling like, well, I'm a nobody. Why would they listen to me? So what would a nurse do?
Yeah, it's a great question. And in the very beginning, I was doing things more locally and for no profit at all, meaning speaking at my state nurses association conference as putting in an abstract, but not speaking for my organization, speaking on the content related to my business. Similarly, the American Holistic Nurse Association has regional local chapters. So reaching out to the ones that I could drive to and giving talks. Again, I didn't expect any money, and if they gave me a thank you card, I was happy about it. So that was like the very beginning. Then when I was like, oh, this is pretty fun, I'm pretty good at it because I get great feedback. I enjoy the energy of the audience. I learned from them. The whole thing was very productive. Then I decided that I wanted to move into monetizing this. So I did write my first book, Nursing from Within. So if you write a book, a lot of times people think, oh, the book's going to make me all this money and I'm going to be a national bestseller and I'm going to do this and that. The book is another form of content marketing I'm going back to. So I don't make tons of dollars from my book through Amazon and all that. However, when I wrote the book, I bought myself, 100 copies or whatever, and I took the book and I sent it to every single state nurses association, every specialty organization with a letter, and then a follow-up phone call and a follow-up email. I had a whole marketing plan that I did over the course of the year. Now, I say state nurse association because my niche is nurses, but for the nurse entrepreneur watching and listening, it's like, who's your niche and where do they hang out? So you send them a packet, even if you don't have a book, a packet of your speaker bio, a one-pager of what your talk's about. If you have any testimonials, maybe from colleagues or other groups you've talked to locally, so you can send a speaker packet, but then you have a plan of follow-up for calling, emailing. And I'm telling you, the first year when I did all that, like I heard nothing back from anyone, but it took about 6 months. And you read in the bio, I talked at South Dakota. That was like my first talk, so I really have to update that bio. But that was like my first, hey, we got your book in the mail last year. So back to that patience. We got your book last year, we'd like to have you for the conference this year. So, and then it continues from there.
Wow.
I know, it's a lot of work. It takes time.
It's a lot of work and it takes a lot of patience, and you have to just keep on getting out there. Okay, which kind of leads into actually where I was going to go just now, and that is, what are like the different associations or groups that you could recommend to somebody who wants to get in either to podcasting or who wants to get into speaking, or maybe some of them are the same or similar. Who would you recommend?
So for podcasting, it's a challenging question because I'm not sure of any groups. There is a group, Pulse Media Network, that I am a part of. And that's when I would send you the links for the equipment and everything. It's RNFM radio. Kevin Ross set out with another project called Pulse Media Network. And there are a few podcasts hosted there in aggregate, meaning the podcast is on that site. So if someone goes to Pulse Media Network, they find, a couple podcasts. So that's one place for resources and stuff. Mm-hmm. I don't have any association or any group that I am a part of. I kind of do that on my own, unfortunately, which is probably not a good response. So people, don't do that on your own. Go find a group. But I mean, what I do is I listen to other podcasts. So driving in my car, listen to podcasts on business or podcasts on well-being or even mindset. And so by listening, I hear what other people do. Even on money, a lot of the questions in my podcast, even though my podcast is not related to money, that format was taken from a money podcast I listened to because I like her format, but I just changed the questions to go for mine. So I think listening to podcasts is a good resource.
Yeah.
For speaking, there's the National Speakers Association, Toastmasters, your local Chamber of Commerce. And then online, I'm involved with a lot of nurse groups in Facebook where a lot of these people are present and we ask questions and receive support. And so to that end, the National Nurses in Business Association is a conference that I've gone to and recommend, and a group that I would recommend.
Okay. All right. That's helpful. Okay. Let me ask you again, and we're kind of just almost ready to wrap up, but I do want to find out what, going from working, as a psych nurse into podcasting and blogging and speaking and all that, what kind of doors have kind of opened up to you professionally since making that switch?
So professionally, in terms of my business, you mean?
Well, or just nursing, your nursing profession. I mean, how has your profession changed? How has your nursing practice changed going from psych to podcasting, speaking? It seems like a big change.
Well, actually, I would think I will say, I believe it's not too different, because as a psychiatric nurse, you have to listen. You have to be extremely patient. I mean, you have to be creative in trying to talk to people, or even in leading groups. Like, I used to lead groups as a psych nurse. So a lot of the skills that I was using in my nursing career and with that patient population, I think I do carry over to now as this business owner in terms of listening. A podcaster, I can't be jumping on my guest with my input and my next word. I have to listen to what they say, reflect it back to the audience, and then segue us to the next question. With speaking, same. I have to be creative. If I see the audience is like kind of dozing and it's after lunch, then I might have to change up the talk right there, impromptu, and get them engaged again somehow. So I think a lot of what I learned as in being a nurse and working on the floor, I really have applied as a business owner, or how I show up in the business that I've established for myself. It's definitely rewarding in that I get to make the decisions and I get to be the leader and the boss. So I'm not waiting around for approval from someone else or the policy to change. So that's pretty fun. I really do like the independence and autonomy. In fact, when you were asking about the associations and the groups, I tend to and again, this is not something I would recommend for nurse entrepreneurs. It's something I need to constantly work at. But I kind of isolate myself because I just like working like that. Like, by myself. It's just easy, it's fast, and of course I've hired my teams, but on the actual content and stuff, I mean, I do prefer working alone. So as a nurse entrepreneur, if you choose to, you know, you're kind of setting this up for yourself. Again, I wouldn't recommend totally isolating yourself, and I'm not saying that I do, but that is a benefit. I like being that independence and that autonomy I have.
Right, right.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it definitely does, and I think that, you know, it's good. It's helpful for other.
I can't hear you.
Oops, you can't hear me. Uh-oh. Let's see. Can you hear me now? Oh no. Uh-oh. Okay.
Oh, there we go.
Okay.
I unplugged this.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe my mic was off or dangling or something like that. But so what I was saying was that, you know, as nurses, we just think that, oh, well, that's all we can do is just be nurses. And that's really kind of, I don't know, couldn't be further from the truth. We know so much. We have so many skills that aren't just applicable to nursing. You know, it could go anywhere. And you do use a lot of nursing skills in business. So I wouldn't want anyone to be afraid of going into some kind of a business just because they're a nurse. You have so many skills that transfer over just so easily. And the other thing that I wanted to comment on too that you brought up is the autonomy. It's, you know, as nursing, you're tied in. You can't go willy-nilly being creative and doing your own thing. You just can't. And because that's the nature of it. You know, there are policies, procedures, protocols, and you got to stick with that. But if you're of the kind of personality that you're very creative, or you like to just get the job done yourself, like, hey, you know what? I love working on my own, love being my own boss. I like the autonomy. Then you're going to love being a nurse entrepreneur, because that's exactly what you do. You make your own decisions. And if you make a bad decision, oh, well, you have nobody to blame, you know, but yourself, and you own that and you move on. But it's a great learning experience. There's so much to learn. And so if you really enjoy learning new things, you're in the right place as a nurse entrepreneur. So I'm glad you brought those up. Those are just so true. Okay. I think that's about it. That's a lot. And what we'll do is we'll just put all of this in our show notes here for this interview. We'll put those links and such for our viewers so you can find that. Elizabeth, I want to thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to meet you and to find out about your business and your journey, you know, from psych to podcasting and speaking all over the place. It's pretty amazing. You're an amazing woman. I don't know how you get it all done, but but you do. But any final words? I want to make sure that everybody's got your website, your Facebook page or group, whatever. So go ahead.
So thank you, first off, for the opportunity, and thank everyone for watching. I appreciate it, and feel free to reach out. You know, I'm very accessible and answer questions easily and can chat. I think what I would finally say is, as just to kind of tie into what we were talking about earlier, is just think about your unique self, your skills, your assets, your strengths. Like, what do you love, even in your job as a nurse, and how would you apply that to a business, to an entrepreneurial endeavor, to a product, to a program, whatnot. So if you love being that educator, then bring that to your business, and it'll be easier and more fun. And even though it will take time and patience, it will be easier and more fun, and that's what'll keep you going. So as long as I'm having fun with the work that I do, then I keep doing it. When it's not fun, I'm either going to hire someone or that part of my business is gone. So right. That's it.
Right. Okay, so just to remind everyone too, we can find Elizabeth over at elizabethscala.com. And your podcast, we can find that on iTunes or Stitcher. Are you on Stitcher too?
Yeah, everything. Yep, Your Next Shift, both of those. And then, I mean, it's linked to the website too, but on the mobile stuff, it's, you know, just look in for Your Next Shift. You'll find it there.
Okay, great. All right. Well, Elizabeth, thank you again so much for joining us. And so just once again, this is Christy Hendricks with Change of Shift. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for joining Elizabeth, and we'll see you next time.